Kamara Osei was 34 years old when the wedding invitation arrived in a cream envelope with her name written in calligraphy on the outside, as though the man who sent it had not spent the better part of 2 years telling anyone who would listen that she was the mistake he'd barely survived. She drove a 7-year-old Corolla to work each morning and wore sensible flats and brought her lunch in a paper bag and held a position at a mid-sized logistics firm in Charlotte that paid her well enough and that nobody who attended Marcus Holt's wedding would have considered impressive. His friends called her the X, or sometimes, when they were being especially careful, that woman. And Marcus himself had been known to call her, at cocktail parties and team dinners and any other gathering where the story served him, his loser ex. The one who hadn't known what she wanted. The one he'd had to leave behind to build his life. What Marcus Holt did not know, what none of the 230 guests seated in gilded chairs at the Ballantyne estate on a Saturday afternoon in September did not know, was that the woman he had invited as a display of his own magnanimity owned the company that held the catering contract for the venue, was the silent majority shareholder in the hotel where the reception was to follow, and had arrived that afternoon in a Rolls-Royce Ghost that she had purchased 11 months ago, with a cashier's check drawn on an account in her name alone, worth $3 million at signing. She had not planned to attend. She had changed her mind on a Thursday, after she learned that Marcus had told the story about the loser ex at his own rehearsal dinner, and that 3 people had laughed, and that his new bride, a woman named Priya Connell, age 30, daughter of a venture capitalist and possessor of a trust fund that Marcus had evaluated very carefully before proposing, had laughed along with them. What happened when that Rolls-Royce pulled up the estate driveway rearranged something in the room that could not be put back. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning of the wedding, Kamara rose at 5:30, made a pot of coffee, and sat at the kitchen island in the house on Aldersgate Lane that she had renovated herself over the preceding 3 years. Not hired out, but done, room by room, with contractors she had selected and supervised, and in some rooms, for the work that was within her skill set. Completed with her own hands. The kitchen cabinets were custom, sourced from a craftsman in Asheville, whose work she had found through a client referral, and she had installed the cabinet hardware herself on a Saturday afternoon in November, while her father sat at the counter and watched, and offered, occasionally, commentary on her technique. She thought about her father that morning. Calvin Osei had been a civil engineer for 31 years. A quiet man who built roads and bridges and drainage systems for a county that used his work every day without knowing his name, and who had never once seemed troubled by that arrangement. He had told her, when she was maybe 14, and had come home from school angry because a teacher had given the credit for a group project to someone who hadn't done the work. The structure doesn't know who got the ribbon. Kamara. It knows who built it. That's the conversation that matters. He had passed 3 years ago, in the spring, and she still talked to him sometimes in the quiet of early mornings, and he still answered, in the way that people who shaped you answered long after they were gone, through the things they had left running inside you. She had built her first business the year her father retired, with $18,000 she had saved over 4 years, and the specific, methodical discipline of someone who had been raised by a man who planned every structure before he broke ground. A logistics consulting practice, modest to start. 2 clients and a home office and a contract she had written herself from a template she had studied for 2 weeks before using. She had grown it quietly over 7 years, adding clients, adding staff, adding service lines, and then, 4 years ago, had leveraged the practice into a partial acquisition of the logistics firm she had been doing contract work for, becoming a minority partner. Then, 18 months later, a majority partner. Then, last year, following the retirement of the firm's founder, the sole owner, Marcus had known her during the thin years, the 2 client years, the home office years. He had known her as someone who worked hard and worried about invoices and drove a used car, and he had concluded from those years that he understood the shape of her, and that the shape of her was not quite enough for what he wanted to become. He had said so when he left, not cruelly, but with the particular honesty of a man who has already made his decision and is now just explaining it. He had said she was going to be fine. He had said it the way you said it to someone you did not believe it about. That was 3 years ago. She had been more than fine. She had been busy. The invitation had come on a Wednesday, by post, in that cream envelope with the calligraphy. She had stood at her front door and looked at it for a moment without opening it, because she understood immediately what it was and what it was intended to communicate. She had opened it, read it, set it on the kitchen counter, and not thought about it for 3 days. Then her friend Paulette had called and told her about the rehearsal dinner. Paulette had heard from her cousin Jade, who worked at the hotel where the rehearsal was held, and who had been within earshot when Marcus held court at a table of groomsmen and future in-laws and described his first serious relationship, Kamara, though he did not use her name, as the years I spent trying to love someone who didn't have a vision. He had said it with the practiced ease of a man who had told a version of this story many times and had polished it until it reflected well on him from every angle. He had said she hadn't known what she wanted. He had shaken his head with the particular sorrow of a man performing the dignity of forgiveness for someone who hadn't earned it. He had made them laugh. Twice, Kamara had listened to Paulette's account without interrupting. She had thanked her when she was finished, and had sat for a moment with the phone in her hand, and had examined her own reaction the way she examined everything, not to manage it, but to understand it. She was not hurt. She was past the point where Marcus's assessment of her could reach her. What she was, she realized, was clear. Clear about what the story cost him if she chose not to let it stand. Clear about whether she intended to let it stand. She did not. Paulette had asked, "What do you want to do?" Kamara had said, "I want to attend the wedding." Paulette had understood immediately what that meant, because she had known Kamara for 12 years and knew that when Kamara said she wanted to do something in that specific level tone, the thing was already decided and already planned. She called her attorney on Thursday morning. Reginald Booker had been practicing business and estate law in Charlotte for 26 years and had handled the legal architecture of the logistics firm acquisition and the hotel shareholding and every other significant transaction in Kamara's professional life for the past 5 years. He was not a man who expressed surprise easily, but he listened to what she wanted with the particular attention of someone assembling a picture. She told him what she intended. She told him she wanted documentation that was accurate, comprehensive, and available in written form if anyone in that room chose to inquire. She told him she wanted nothing she could not verify, and nothing that was not already true. He said, when she was finished, "You want everything documented and confirmable. I want everyone in that room to be able to verify every word of it if they choose to," Kamara said. "I'm not asking for a scene. I'm asking for accuracy." Reginald was quiet for a moment. The catering contract? The venue is aware of the ownership structure? The venue's general manager has worked with us for 3 years. He knows who signs the contract. And the hotel? The director of events knows exactly who the majority shareholder is. She's known for 2 years. The car is registered in your name, paid in full. 2. $3 million, cashier's check, 11 months ago. He paused again, the pause of a man who was not surprised, but was nonetheless appreciating the completeness of the arrangement. He asked her to walk him through the full ownership picture, which she did. The logistics firm, 100% held. The hotel's shareholding, 61% majority interest, acquired through a structured buyout over 18 months. The catering contract with the Ballantyne estate, now in its third year. He made notes. He asked 2 clarifying questions and asked no unnecessary ones, which was one of the things she valued about him. "I'll have a 1-page summary prepared," he said when she finished. "Your attorney's letterhead, current ownership interests, current valuations, in case anyone needs to verify." "Thank you, Reginald." Kamara. He said her name the way her father used to say it when she had done something he found both quietly impressive and entirely unsurprising. Wear something appropriate. She spent the rest of that Thursday doing research she had not needed to do, but chose to do, because she was thorough by nature and did not like arriving anywhere without a complete picture. She pulled Marcus's current professional profile, his firm's recent project filings, the public record of Priya Connell's family holdings. Not for leverage. She had no intention of using any of it. For completeness. She wanted to understand the full shape of what she was walking into, the way she had always wanted to understand the full shape of any environment she was about to operate in. What she found confirmed what she had already understood. Marcus had built a career on proximity to money. Priya's family's money, the equity firm's backing, the social infrastructure of people who mistook comfort for capability. It was a legitimate enough strategy. It was not her strategy. Her strategy had always been to build the thing itself, in her own name, with her own capital, and to let the thing speak when it was ready. It was ready. She went to her aunt's house on Friday evening because her Aunt Constance was the only person in her family who had met Marcus and disliked him from the first hour, and who had never once pretended otherwise. Constance was 67 and had worked for 30 years as a contracts administrator for a major Charlotte developer and could read the language of professional ambition the way other people read menus, quickly, accurately, without being deceived by the presentation. "You're going," Constance said. It was not a question. "I am." Constance looked at her for a long moment. "You know what your daddy used to say about structures that couldn't hold their own weight?" Kamara said she did. He said they didn't need your help falling. Constance set down her cup. But he also said that sometimes the person who built the thing that holds needed to be in the room when the inferior one gave way. So people understood the difference. Kamara drove home and laid out what she would wear and set her alarm for 5:30 and slept without difficulty. Because she was not agitated. She was precise. Bitterness required ongoing emotional investment in people who no longer deserved it. The Ballantyne estate sat at the end of a long private drive lined with sycamores, and on a September Saturday with the light the particular quality it got in the early afternoon of a clear Carolina fall, it was genuinely beautiful. Kamara had been to the estate twice before, once for a venue tour when the catering firm had pitched for the contract, and once for a walkthrough 6 months later when the contract was executed. She knew the layout of the kitchen and the arrangement of the service corridors and the name of every member of the events team, because she made it her practice to know the people whose work was part of what she was responsible for. She was familiar with the driveway. She had driven it before in her old car, and in a firm vehicle, and in Reginald's car once, when they had come together for a contract review. She had never driven it in the Rolls. The Rolls-Royce Ghost was the color of deep graphite, dark enough to read as black in anything but direct light and silver in full sun, and she had not bought it for this occasion. Had bought it because it was what she had decided to buy when she decided to buy a car that reflected the actual scale of her life rather than the version of it she had spent years keeping quiet. She pulled up the estate driveway at 2:40 in the afternoon, 20 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, and the young man at the parking attendant stand, she could see from the logo on his vest that he was staff from the catering firm, one of hers, came to the car door with the kind of attentiveness that people extended to vehicles they recognized as serious. He opened her door. He recognized her immediately and said, quietly, "Good afternoon, Miss Osei." She thanked him by name. She stepped out into the September light. She was wearing a dress the color of dark plum, in a fabric that moved the way good fabric moved, and her heels added 3 inches, and she was carrying a small bag that contained Reginald's one-page summary in a cream envelope, in case anyone wanted to read it. She did not expect anyone to need it at the ceremony itself. She had brought it because she was thorough, and because she never arrived anywhere without the documentation to support what she intended to say. The guests on the terrace, there were perhaps 60 of them. Cocktail hour not yet begun. Milling in the way of people who had dressed for a celebration and were looking for the shape of it, went quiet in the particular sequence of a crowd that registers something it did not anticipate. First the car, then the door opening, then the woman stepping out. The quiet moved through the terrace in a wave, one conversation ending and then the next, until the only sound was the ambient sound of the estate itself, the fountain and the wind and the distant preparations in the kitchen she had contracted. She saw Marcus before he saw her. He was standing near the entrance to the ceremony garden with his groomsmen, wearing the expression of a man who had spent the day being congratulated and had developed a particular confidence in the day's arrangement. He was looking toward the parking area when the rolls pulled in, because the sound of it was the sound of something that commanded attention, and his expression held a moment of sincere admiration before he understood whose car it was. Then he understood whose car it was. She walked toward the entrance with the unhurried composure of a woman on her own property. Technically, half of it was. And she saw in his face the specific progression of a man whose mental framework was performing an emergency revision. The car, her dress, the way the staff had moved, the way the guests were still watching. Priya Connell stood beside him, and she was looking at Kamara with the specific expression of a woman whose understanding of the situation was already somewhat ahead of her husband's. Kamara reached the entrance and stopped, and smiled at Marcus with genuine pleasantness. The pleasantness of a woman who needed nothing from this moment, and knew it. "Congratulations," she said. "The venue is beautiful." Marcus said her name. He said it the way people said a word they had been using freely and had just learned was a word they should have been more careful with. "I didn't know you," he started. "I hold the catering contract for the estate," she said. Her voice was level, and a majority interest in the hotel where your reception is this evening. "I thought it was appropriate to come in person." She paused. "I wanted to wish you well. That part is sincere." Priya Connell was looking at her with an expression that had moved past surprise into something more calculating and considerably more interested. Someone in the crowd, she would never know who, said, in a voice pitched low but not low enough, that was the loser X. The silence that followed was the kind that a room produced when a piece of information arrived and everyone needed a moment to recalibrate. Kamara looked at Marcus once more with the easy, unhurried calm of a woman who had attended this event as a courtesy and was finished with the courtesy portion of it. "I won't stay for the ceremony," she said. "I just wanted to say hello." She tilted her head slightly. "Congratulations again, Marcus. I hope you find exactly what you're looking for." She turned and walked back toward the car, and the young man from the catering firm was already at the door. And she got in, and the door closed, and the car moved back down the Sycamore Line Drive the way it had come, and the estate behind her remained where it was, which was on property that the catering contract she held paid a not insignificant sum to use. She drove with both hands on the wheel and the radio off, and she realized, entirely satisfied. Not triumphant, not gloating. Satisfied in the specific way of someone who had set a record straight with the minimum necessary gesture and had not exceeded what the situation required. She had said what was true. She had left before it became anything other than true. The estate was behind her, the sycamores were passing on either side, and ahead of her was a Saturday afternoon that belonged entirely to her. She stopped on the way home for coffee at a place she liked, a small roaster on the corner of a street she had always found peaceful, and she sat at a window table for 45 minutes with her coffee and a book she had been meaning to finish, and she read, and the afternoon moved around her the way good afternoons did when you had nothing left to prove and nowhere pressing to be. Real power operated in quiet rooms. And, on occasion, in long driveways. 14 months passed, and Kamara marked them not by what had happened to Marcus, but by what had happened to the things she was building. She was sitting on the back deck of the Aldersgate Lane house on a Saturday morning in November, watching the Japanese maple she had planted in the rear corner of the yard lose its last leaves in the particular unhurried way of trees that were not concerned with schedules, when her phone showed a message from Paulette that said only, "Have you heard?" She had heard. Most of Charlotte had heard by then, because the story had moved through the city's business community in the efficient way of stories about people who had made a visible miscalculation. Marcus had left his commercial development firm in August under circumstances that his former colleagues described, in the careful language of people who did not want to be quoted, as a difference in professional values. He was consulting now, from what she understood, on a freelance basis, working deals at a scale considerably below the one he had spent years presenting to people as his trajectory. The marriage to Priya Connell had lasted 7 months. She had filed in the spring. The terms of the settlement were not public, but the fact of it was, and the fact of it had traveled through the same circles that the rehearsal dinner story had once traveled through, with a different quality of attention. Kamara had learned all of this through Paulette, and through the ordinary movement of information in a city where she had professional relationships with enough people that news eventually found her without her seeking it. She received each piece the way she received business intelligence, noted, assessed, filed. She did not call anyone to discuss it. She did not feel that it required discussion. The firm had completed its first full fiscal year under her sole ownership, with revenues $1 million above projection. She had taken on 14 new clients and promoted 3 members of staff to positions that reflected the actual scope of what they had been doing for years. She had also, in the spring, accepted a board seat on a regional small business development organization, because her father had believed that what you built was only as durable as the ecosystem you built it in, and she had come to believe that too. There was a man named Solomon, a corporate attorney she had met through the organization's annual conference, who was the kind of person who said what he meant without rehearsing it first, and who had asked to take her to lunch in May and then asked again in June, and had not treated either refusal as a negotiation. When she said yes in July, it was because she had decided it, not because he had worn her down, and he seemed to understand the distinction without needing it explained. He listened to her the way her father had listened to people, with the full attention of someone who understood that listening was its own form of respect. She set her coffee down on the railing and looked at the maple and thought about her father and about the things he had said to her across a lifetime of kitchens and driveways and contractor sites. She thought about the structure that doesn't know who got the ribbon. She thought about the building he had raised in her that she was still, in some ways, discovering the full dimensions of. The deck she was sitting on was new. She had designed it herself and hired a crew in the spring, and had been on site for every day of the build. not supervising in the way that people supervised when they did not trust the people they had hired, but present the way her father had been present at his own job sites, attentive, available, interested in how the thing came together. The last board had gone in on a Friday afternoon in April, and she had walked the length of it alone and pressed her heel at each joint to test the flex, and it had held everywhere she tested it, and she had stood at the far end and looked back at the house and thought, yes, that's right. She picked up her coffee and held it with both hands and let the morning come in around her. She was free. She was solvent. She was unbothered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.